Nuclear-powered missile submarines became a key part of Western and Soviet deterrence.
The Cold War never truly ended, it just sank. Near the Russian port of Vladivostok, dozens of nuclear submarines were towed into a quiet bay and forgotten. The official story was that they were safely decommissioned, nothing more than scrap metal. But not all things are what they seem. When experts recently deployed advanced scanning technology over the site, they found a terrifying secret lurking within the corroded hulls. This discovery has turned a forgotten scrapyard into one of the most hazardous places on Earth, and the danger is leaking out. Where metal whales go to decay. You see, what experts eventually uncovered there is far more than just a collection of rusting hulls. The picture that is forming now, as new evidence comes to light, is more disturbing than anyone could have possibly predicted. During the intense standoff of the Cold War, the Soviet Union went all in on building a massive nuclear submarine fleet. The goal was to project power across the globe and maintain a terrifying nuclear threat against the West. By the late 1980s, the Soviet Navy had hundreds of these underwater behemoths, including ballistic missile submarines, sneaky attack submarines, and multi-purpose vessels that could handle almost any mission. Many people are crazy about the sheer scale of this operation. These subs were built at an incredible speed in shipyards from the frigid Kola Peninsula all the way to the far eastern ports of Vladivostok. The fleet was unimaginably vast. Some models, like the legendary Typhoon-class, were the largest submarines ever built, measuring over 570 feet long. To put that in perspective, that's longer than 1.5 football fields. Each one was capable of carrying 20 nuclear missiles, every single one of them many times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Running this massive fleet was a huge drain on resources, requiring constant patrols, training, and maintenance. But the thing nobody tells you is what happens when these powerful machines get old. The question of what to do with submarines at the end of their service life became a massive problem. In Vladivostok, that problem became a very visible, very rusty nightmare. The city was a key base for the Soviet Pacific Fleet, and its bays quickly became a dumping ground for decommissioned subs. Over time, a haunting cluster of hulls appeared, many stripped of their valuable parts and left to rot in the shallow water. What many overlooked is that these weren't just old boats. Decommissioning a nuclear submarine is an incredibly complex and dangerous job. It involves safely removing the highly radioactive nuclear fuel, handling contaminated parts with extreme care, and then dealing with the massive steel hull. The Soviet Union had a system for this, but they were building new subs way faster than they could safely retire the old ones. When the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, Russia was left with hundreds of these submarines and an economy in freefall. To put it mildly, they didn't have the money or the resources to deal with this ticking time bomb. The Vladivostok submarine cemetery became a stark symbol of this crisis. Dozens of hulls sit there, partially submerged, their steel skin being eaten away by the salt water. Some are moored so close together they look like a tangled metal monster rising from the depths. Retired naval engineers say these were supposed to be temporary holding pens, but decades went by and nothing was done. These ghost ships, with their nuclear hearts still inside, were simply forgotten. But they would not remain forgotten forever, and what was inside was far from dead. Russia's hidden nuclear accident. The quiet, forgotten graveyard of submarines is terrifying on its own. But to understand the true danger lurking in Vladivostok, we have to look back at a dark secret from the Soviet era, an accident that proved just how badly things can go wrong. In August of 1985, at a naval facility called Chajma Bay, not far from Vladivostok, a routine refueling operation turned into one of the worst nuclear accidents in Soviet naval history. The incident happened while technicians were working on a nuclear-powered submarine. Refueling was always known to be one of the riskiest jobs, but on this day, a catastrophic chain of mistakes and equipment failures led to a full-blown disaster. According to the official reports, which were kept secret for years, the crew was replacing the reactor's fuel rods when an uncontrolled chain reaction started. The result was a massive steam explosion inside the reactor compartment. The blast was so powerful it sent the 20-ton reactor lid flying into the air, releasing a deadly plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere. The explosion tragically resulted in the loss of 10 lives instantly and severely injured dozens more, mostly naval personnel working nearby. Witnesses later described how the blast scattered radioactive debris all over the shipyard, while a cloud of radioactive steam drifted over the entire area. A fire followed the explosion, burning for hours and spreading even more contamination across the docks and the surrounding landscape. Chajma Bay, once just a normal inlet, became ground zero for a secret nuclear disaster. The Soviet response was swift and silent, a complete lockdown. Security forces sealed off the site, and a curtain of secrecy fell over the entire event. The families of those who lost their lives were told very little, and the true scale of the radioactive release was hidden from the world. It wasn't until after the Soviet Union collapsed that the full, horrifying story came out. Reports detailed the terrifying levels of contamination. Radiation surveys showed that radioactive isotopes had settled over the land and water all around the bay. Soil samples were packed with cesium and strontium, and parts of the seabed were contaminated far beyond safe levels. The blast had poisoned everything: equipment, buildings, and the very ground itself. Experts have warned that even decades later, the radioactive residue from that single accident remains detectable in Chajma Bay. This disaster set a chilling precedent. It showed everyone just how vulnerable these submarine reactors were, especially when maintenance was rushed. It proved that a few small mistakes could lead to a massive nuclear incident with devastating consequences. For the experts looking at the submarine graveyard in Vladivostok today, the Chajma Bay accident is a constant, terrifying reminder. Even though those retired subs are no longer sailing, the 1985 disaster proved that mishandling their nuclear fuel or reactor components could be catastrophic, not just for the workers, but for the entire environment. The accident also showed that radioactive contamination doesn't just go away. It lingers in the soil, in the water, and in the marine life for generations. Chajma Bay is the clear, undeniable proof of what can happen when nuclear submarine operations go terribly wrong. And now, dozens of these same reactors are slowly rotting away just a few miles from a major city. Too many subs, too little time. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia inherited a navy of incredible power, but also a toxic legacy of unimaginable scale. The new Russian Federation was suddenly responsible for hundreds of nuclear-powered submarines, many of which were old, outdated, and desperately in need of being decommissioned. But with the country's economy in shambles, Russia was facing an unprecedented decommissioning backlog. It was a crisis of epic proportions. At the time, experts estimated that more than 180 nuclear submarines needed to be dismantled. Think about that number. Each one of those vessels had a nuclear reactor inside, and many of them were still loaded with spent, highly radioactive fuel. The task was simply too big for Russia's shipyards to handle. Just getting the fuel out was a massive challenge. It involved a delicate operation to remove the spent fuel rods, seal them in special containers, and transport them to secure storage sites. But in the chaos of the 1990s, this process often didn't happen. Some submarines were just left tied to the docks or anchored in remote bays with their reactors still fully loaded, creating an unbelievable safety risk. The thing is, taking apart a nuclear sub is one of the most complex demolition jobs on the planet. The reactor compartment, which is intensely radioactive, has to be carefully cut out of the hull, shielded in layers of steel and concrete, and then moved to a long-term storage facility. This requires massive dry docks, powerful cranes, and specialized equipment, all of which were in short supply. The financial crisis made everything worse. There was barely enough money to keep the active Navy running, let alone pay for the massive cost of decommissioning the old fleet. Insiders who worked in the shipyards back then described a nightmare scenario. Some subs were left floating for years with their hulls cut open, but their reactors still inside. Others were stripped of anything valuable, and their radioactive skeletons were simply abandoned, waiting for a day that might never come. This created a terrifying patchwork of risks across Russia's coastlines. Soon the rest of the world started to notice. Environmental organizations began to document the abandoned submarines, publishing shocking reports. Their photos showed rusting conning towers and skeletal hulls, a haunting testament to a nuclear fleet left to decay. They also uncovered evidence that in some cases, entire reactor compartments had been secretly dumped at sea. The international community was alarmed. In the late 1990s, programs were set up between Russia, the United States, and other countries to help deal with the crisis. Through these programs, foreign money and technical help were sent to Russia to speed up the submarine dismantlement. This assistance was crucial. It allowed Russia to finally defuel dozens of submarines and secure many of the hazardous reactor compartments. But even with all that help, the backlog was just too big to be cleared overnight. Cutting up a single submarine could take over a year, and there were hundreds waiting in line. What's more, once the reactor compartments were removed, they had to be stored somewhere. Russia created massive open-air storage sites where these huge radioactive steel sections were stacked side by side like giant deadly Lego blocks. These sites reduced the immediate risk of them sinking, but they created a whole new set of long-term problems. Even without fuel, these compartments remain radioactive for decades and require constant monitoring. The legacy of this backlog is still visible today. While international help made a huge difference, the job is far from finished. Rows of reactor compartments sit in storage yards. Some decommissioned subs are still afloat, waiting to be dismantled. For the experts, it's a clear lesson. Building a massive nuclear fleet is one thing, but safely retiring it is a far harder and far more dangerous task. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come, hidden in plain sight at Vladivostok. A living nuclear hazard. For years, the submarine cemetery near Vladivostok was a local legend, a collection of ghost ships that everyone knew about, but no one really understood. But when official surveys and investigations finally pulled back the curtain, the world was forced to confront the horrifying truth. This is when experts confirmed the existence of an abandoned Soviet nuclear graveyard, and what they found was worse than anyone had dared to imagine. The surveys revealed what the whispers had always claimed: dozens of rusting submarine hulls clustered together in the shallow water. Some were listing half-sunk, while others were tied loosely to crumbling piers. It was a shocking sight, but it was far from the most terrifying part of the story. According to insiders who studied the site, the real horror was what was still inside these decaying hulks. Several of them still contained their entire reactor compartments, and in some of those reactors, the spent nuclear fuel had never been removed. For years, the assumption had been that these subs were defueled before being abandoned. The surveys proved that assumption was dangerously wrong. One naval engineer familiar with the investigation put it bluntly: this graveyard of steel was a living hazard. The combination of corrosion, leaking materials, and incomplete dismantlement had created a persistent growing risk of a major radioactive leak. Now get this, the danger isn't just in Vladivostok. Experts have confirmed that across Russia, reactor compartments were cut from submarines and stored improperly. In some cases, they were just dumped into remote bays. Reports describe at least a handful of these dumped compartments containing damaged fuel, which dramatically increases the chances of radioactive material leaking into the ocean. But the Vladivostok site is unique because of the sheer concentration of these dangerous vessels in one place, so close to a major city. Published investigations list multiple reactor assemblies still present in the rusting Pacific Fleet submarines. Experts warn that having so many compromised hulls in shallow water multiplies the threat. Unlike a secure land-based storage facility, these submarines are exposed to storms, tides, and the relentless corrosion of salt water. A breach in one of these reactor compartments could release radioactive poison directly into the marine ecosystem. According to insiders, the mapping work revealed another shocking detail. Some of the abandoned subs were never properly logged in official records. They were effectively lost in the bureaucracy. Their status and the state of their reactors was a complete unknown until surveyors physically inspected them. That fact alone sent a chill down the spines of international observers. In the world of nuclear safety, even one unaccountable reactor is one too many. Environmental experts point out that the waters around Vladivostok are heavily used for fishing and shipping. The idea that reactor compartments with nuclear fuel inside are sitting just offshore raises terrifying questions about environmental contamination and human health. Traces of radioactive isotopes have already been found in sediment samples from the area. The fate of Vladivostok's submarine graveyard hangs in the balance. But with global tensions rising, do you think countries can still work together to clean up a mess like this? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking discoveries.